Hello and welcome to Industry Insights. Today we have Rajesh Dhuddu, SVP and Global Business Head, Blockchain and Metaverse for Tech Mahindra. Rajesh helps global CXOs understand more about blockchain and metaverse and apply them to address relevant business problems. He's a thought leader, and the best part about him is he helps simplify these concepts and make it relevant to people. Welcome, Rajesh.
Thank you, Madhu. Pleasure.
Let me start with the simplest question,
Sure.
okay, which is what is metaverse and how is it different from VR and other technologies that we know of today?
So, metaverse, primarily, according to me, when you have a commerce layer built into it, it becomes metaverse. And the way that particular environment or the layer is presented, if it is presented using an external device, for example, you could access metaverse through an external device like Oculus or HTC Vive, then it becomes virtual reality. The same metaverse can be delivered via a simple device like a mobile, like a laptop or like a tablet. And when you're looking that interactive environments of metaverse using these devices, then it becomes augmented reality. So AR and VR are the presentation layers of the metaverse, where VR is based on an additional device, whereas AR is, there is no need to use an additional device other than your regular phone, your regular tablet, or your regular computer.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I'm a futuristic science fiction fan, and so of course I've read Neil Stephenson's
Right.
Snow Crash, right, where he
Right.
talks about the metaverse.
That's where the term originated.
Correct, and his vision of metaverse, of course, is very different from what you've talked about, right?
Right.
There, it's much more of a dystopian reality, whereas here it is much more in our lives
Correct.
here, right?
Okay.
So, is it fair to say that AR and VR are necessary for the metaverse to exist, but it's much more broader than what AR and VR are?
Yeah, absolutely. So what is happening here is you want everything in an immersive fashion. And let's understand why that immersiveness is required. The immersiveness helps you to make decisions. And let's see how this immersiveness has evolved over a period of time. If you go back about 30, 40 years back into the history, in the context of brands and in the context of commerce, the only immersive thing that you had was text. The brands gave you tons of text about their products and about their services. You had to analyze them, you had to study, and you had to visualize them. So analysis, study, and visualization was your responsibility, and brands spent a lot of energy, lot of effort in making that text attractive, and then they realized it is going to be suboptimal, right? Because it's not translating to what they wanted it to translate to from an end consumer perspective. Then it got substituted with audio content. Then it got substituted with a video content. Why I'm bringing all this is it's a continuous realm of evolution. You started immersiveness with text, brought an immersiveness with audio, brought an immersiveness with video, but still it is not optimal. And that's where the metaverse comes into picture. And all of this is also being facilitated by evolution of underlying technology. 2G was good enough for text. 3G was good for video. 2G was good for audio. And 4G was good for everything. And with 5G, it is very, very conducive to bring in that additional layer of immersiveness through metaverse.
What do you think are the potential economic, social, and cultural implications of metaverse?
Oh, there are many in terms of, while I answer that, I also would like to detail or rather emphasize that there are two different disciplines within metaverse. One is called as the consumer metaverse, everything that comes around B2C kind of engagements. And another one is industrial metaverse, everything that comes around B2B engagements. Now, let me talk more about this. When it comes to consumer metaverse, as I told you, in terms of if you don't give information in an immersive fashion, you could still make your purchase decision, but there could be dissonance after the purchase. So now we are working, or rather the industry is working on a concept where can you reduce the dissonance by bringing in immersiveness even before the purchase is made. A good example is uh, something which cannot be perceived before it is handed over to you, for example, an apartment. You are able to sense, you are able to perceive that apartment either by virtue of a video rendition of that apartment or by virtue of looking at the engineering design and the floor plans. But after the apartment has been built, if it is not in line with what you had visualized or what you had internalized, it results in a lot of purchase dissonance. So can that purchase dissonance can be addressed through metaverse, where can you teleport people into their apartments, the apartments that are going to come in future. Can you teleport people into their apartments, into their apartment environments where they can sense everything even before it is built? And when you are able to do that, you are able to reduce the level of uncertainty. You are able to reduce the dependence on the visualization at the end of the purchaser or at the purchaser's end, and you are also able to reduce the dissonance. That is the game change aspect that brands are able to bring in, whether it is review, whether it is purchase of an apartment, purchase of a vehicle, purchase of a service. That's where it is going to come into existence.
So you did mention there were two aspects. So one was the B2C aspect
Correct.
of it, and the other was the ESG aspect
Correct.
of it, right? Now, from a perspective of how people think about it, right? So I can see the economic value about it. What about the cultural aspect of it? Do you think it's a generational thing? What about adoption per se?
Right. So in terms of definitely when you're making a shift, it definitely has the generation aspect and generation angle to it. Obviously, it comes naturally to people who are millennials or people who are tech savvy, and take any of those digital transformations in our own life, right? There is a particular element before we became very comfortable with digital banking. And now digital banking comes naturally to you. Earlier, in my own example, I would make frequent trips to ATM to at least know in terms of what is the balance which is there in my banking account, even though I had an option to check it on the phone. But just to be doubly sure, I used to make the trip to ATM to get a statement from the ATM. I don't do it anymore, and then I just check it on my mobile app. So from an adoption perspective, it does take time, and obviously for people who are digital natives, people who are digital savvy, it comes naturally to them. Having said that, there's a lot of code of practice that has not evolved in metaverse, pretty much like the code of practice that was not there in web. People didn't know how to conduct themselves on the web, what kind of information to be shared, what kind of information not to be shared, what are the best practices, what are not so good practices. The same things are applicable from a metaverse perspective again. So the code of practice has to be evolved. People have to become a lot more familiar with secure and safe practices in metaverse, and that will evolve over a period of time.
Yeah, I think it's great you're bringing these out, right? Because even though it's a hot topic and a buzzword, they don't realize it's still nascent in its origin, and
Right.
the vision is much more grand
Correct.
when it comes to what the
Correct.
metaverse can
Correct.
do.
Correct.
Now, how do people interact with the metaverse right now?
Okay. So there are two methods of interaction with metaverse, and obviously those who are very proficient and those who like to have an external device like an Oculus device, they use the VR on the Oculus device and then get into the metaverse environment. The other popular method of interaction with the metaverse is you create an avatar of yourself and then log in into an environment by virtue of your avatar. So you're in the environment as a proxy, and that proxy is your avatar, and then you manage the avatar. Like for example, you getting into a showroom, which means you logged in as your avatar. You're walking into a street, you're seeing brands, you're getting into a showroom of a brand, and then you're interacting either with the other people who are in that particular shop or with the store staff. in that particular shop. So that is through an avatar format. Whereas you don't want to do an avatar, you just want to put the Oculus device or the HTC device, then you feel as though you have jumped into the environment and you're walking through without the dependency on an avatar. In a VR, you don't see an avatar. In an AR, you see your avatar doing everything on your behalf. And that's how people interact with Metaverse these days.
Yeah, and this is fascinating because it requires brands and entities to start creating their own multiverses in some way, right? Storefronts in these worlds where you could start interacting.
Right.
How do you think this would evolve in the future in some ways? So right now it's immersive with Oculus. But what about the future?
The future would be in terms of, there are two winning mantras to this. One is in terms of people who are able to do a lot more immersiveness using a mobile first and a web first strategy. They are going to be the winners. Because it becomes difficult to spend on an external device and then use an external device. So there's a lot of natural attunement and acclimatization that is required for those devices, number one. And number two, the people who are able to program as much as the real world emotions into a virtual world, they are going to be the winners. Ultimately, what are we trying to do? We are trying to program the real world emotions and real world feelings into a virtual world and then make that happen or make it a possibility in a virtual world. This could be either in the form of haptics, in terms of those additional devices that will help you to touch and feel in a metaverse kind of an environment. And that's where we are going into. So whoever is able to crack the code on programming the real world emotions and making it immersive without the dependency on additional devices, they're going to be the game changers.
Right. I think you put it well, because one of the things I always say is the world is moving to a more real world interactions, right? So if you think about human machine interactions, typing is not natural behavior. It's a learned behavior, just like writing is, which is why we prefer to talk much more.
Exactly.
And so the metaverse is probably giving us a path towards those real world interactions, haptics and everything else will work there. So what do you think? So if you think about how the world is evolving in terms of metaverse, and what are the things that you think companies should be working on as such?
So the companies, as I said, the another element that we didn't touch upon to a good extent is the B2B metaverse, the industrial metaverse, where the focus is on programming the real world physics into the virtual environments. So basically, I'm of the opinion that everything that moves in future will be autonomous, and everything that gets built in the physical world will be first built in the virtual world. Not for fancy purposes, but in a virtual world, you can simulate a lot more conditions rather than in a digital world. And using that semantically generated data, you are able to program the real world physics into the virtual world, where you can use it for your design optimization. And for your, you could increase the performance of a machine, you can improve the design of a vehicle, the design of a building. And because of that, lot more people, even on the industrial side, are getting onto that particular metaverse. And that's where I see a lot of focus towards those aspects, both from a consumer metaverse as well as an industrial metaverse perspective.
So I'm going to take a little bit of a turn here.
Sure.
We've talked about businesses and the role it can play for businesses. So what about consumers as such? Like, one of the things I see a lot about is how Metaverse is changing the way we work, right? So some of the examples that are shown about are workplace collaborations and everything else. So how do you think that's going to change? What about the way we learn, and of course entertainment as such also?
So learning is a lot more intuitive, and in our growing days, which is the case in your case as well, where multiple times you were told that a picture represents 10,000 words, right? a metaverse may represent 1,000,000 words because it's a lot more intuitive, and then your ability to internalize by using a metaverse environment is much higher compared to looking at a diagrammatic illustration or a pictorial illustration, and that's where we are going. We want to make everything intuitive, and as you rightly said, everything that's natural, like writing versus typing and so on. So you want to enable those natural methods of assimilating information, natural methods of assimilating knowledge, which is what is going to be facilitated by Metaverse. So I'm already seeing the future classrooms being built in Metaverse, the future of work collaboration being happening in Metaverse. You take the example of Meta, or you take the example of Microsoft. Now Microsoft wants to integrate Mesh, which is their metaverse offering, into Teams and make it a lot more collaborative, so that you can, on a Teams, you can feel that even though you are physically distant, you feel as though you're co-located in the same room. And you can bring in a lot of collaboration using that metaverse offering of Microsoft called Mesh into MS Teams. Meta is working on what they call as workrooms, and the workrooms is again focused on productivity enhancement.
So here's the last question for you, right? So I think technology is fascinating. I think it's very futuristic.
Right.
But nowadays we're also wary of new stuff, right? So can you shed some light on ethical considerations, data and security issues, privacy concerns, and anything else?
Oh, there are plenty in terms of, as I told you, the code of practice. For example, you go to an environment like Altspace VR, which is a metaverse offering from Microsoft. Microsoft bought that company. Before you had to interact in that particular environment, there was no physical distancing that was possible. And a lot of people had complained saying that why is my avatar being encroached, or somebody being touched inappropriately, their avatar being touched inappropriately. And it has come over a period of time. Now you have checks and balances. People can put a circle, people can define, saying that how many steps the other person can come closer to your avatar. As in the real world, right? If somebody is trying to get closer to you, intentionally or unintentionally, the natural reaction is to step back, or the natural reaction is to prevent them from coming closer. So can you simulate that in a metaverse kind of an environment? It has come over a period of time. I'm just giving you a simple example from a code of practice perspective. Then also from a perspective of sharing your information, where to share information, where not to share information, how to protect your identity, how to be anonymous but still share your identity in a selective fashion. So those are the things that are going to come up. And I'm of the opinion that whatever we do in the technology world, the people who want to manipulate it get there faster than people who want to do it for a good reason. So from that perspective, we're seeing a lot of cyber actors becoming very, very prominent in the metaverse. They're doing malware implantation in the metaverse environments. They're doing phishing attacks in the metaverse environments. So the checks and balances that you would apply for your digital interactions need to be applied in metaverse interactions as well. Not just that, maybe they have to be amplified, and everybody is working towards that at this point of time.
Thank you, Rajesh. This was a fascinating conversation and very insightful about the real applications and what's going on in the metaverse. Some of us might believe that we are already in the metaverse, but this is a good way of thinking about a different metaverse.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Pleasure. Thanks, Madhu.
Thanks.